John, we went to a heavyweight today to begin the second half, and that's Bob Costas.
So excited to have Bob on again. Not just a fantastic teammate to us at MLB Network, but fantastic friend of the show, willing to go on anytime at no cost, no price. So good for him. And it's a great time to talk to him right after the All-Star break. Well, right during the All-Star break, excuse me, and the Hall of Fame coming up. So those are two areas where he is expert and really looking forward to that one.
I bet you I sneak in a question about the Olympics. I sneak in a question, sorry, John, about the old ABA. We'll talk a lot more about baseball. John and I will discuss what the big storylines are for the second half. We'll talk about what a great job our beat writers, Mike Puma and Greg Joyce, did with their grades for the Yankees and Mets, and we'll talk about those grades a little. We'll play hit and error at the end if you stick with us on the show with Joel Sherman and Jon Heyman. John, you and I were fresh back from the All-Star game, an interesting All-Star game, but that means the second half beckons. I wonder, hit me with something you're really looking forward to. And to say, we didn't prepare, we didn't tell each other. Tell
No.
me a thing. We'll
Well,
bounce back
I
and
mean,
forth a little bit.
we're in New York. So, I mean, I'm looking at the two New York teams. The Yankees were kind of a Jekyll and Hyde situation. I mean, which team is it? We're going to find out, I think, coming up soon. That would be my question with the Yankees. And the Mets, I mean, they look much improved. Certainly, we're 11 games under at one point, now in playoff position. Are they that team? They are improving. I thought they were a playoff team even when they were doing crummy. So I think they're going that way, but you never know.
I think it's a little bit provincial for sure for us to talk about it, but I'm with you, John. I think the National League wild card race is fascinating. You got 9 teams that are either in or within 3.5 games, and who handles injuries the best, who handles trade deadlines the best. I think it's really, I know there's a lot of people who don't like how big the playoffs have got. It's still smaller than every other major league's playoffs, and it creates some drama that wouldn't be there. And I think there's drama around the Yankees in both elements. Are they better than the Orioles? Can they outdo the Orioles the rest of the way? And if not, what are the implications of that? They're 5.5 up on a playoff spot. Now I assume that's a 90% chance they get in. They're a good team. But to me, they're an Aaron Judge injury for a few weeks or something away from being in a more problematic spot. So I look at that, and I mentioned the name. I am fascinating. Where does Aaron Judge go this season? Does he get towards 60? Again, I think he's
He's
on pace for
amazing.
57. That would be quite a thing for him to get to 60 twice in his career.
I mean, if they don't make the playoffs with Judge and Soto, and we saw at the All
And
Star game,
Cole back.
they're batting 3 and 4 in the All Star game, and that's the better lineup, by the way, the American League, and they got the 3 and 4 hitters, so they probably have the two best hitters in baseball. You can make a case for Ohtani, certainly, but I think they have the two best hitters. If they blow this, I mean, my God, they'll never hear the end of it. So I don't anticipate that. I think we probably have two playoff teams, and that sixth spot in the National League's been a lucky one. Last 2 years, World Series, Phillies, and then the Diamondbacks. But it is competition because the Diamondbacks are better than they've shown. They've got good pitchers coming back. The Giants should be better than they've shown. I mean, the Cubs, my God, they got to be better than this, right? So it's not easy. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to. There's not going to be a team with a losing record or 81 or even 82 wins getting in. You're going to have to play better in the second half if you're the Mets, and I think they will.
Yeah, they got a tough August. They got 2 long trips out west. The schedule's really rough on them. It would help them to add some relief pitching between now and the trade deadline and to get Senga back to steel themselves for what will be a tough month. I think if they get to September 1st in good shape, they'd be in good shape. Can I throw out 2 teams I'm really fascinated about just for the second half, and you tell me what you think? I do think the Rangers have a run in them. I just think they're better than they've played to date. And if they could get some of the injured guys back, I think they're very close to getting Josh Young back at third base. I think they're very close to getting Evan Carter back. They're close to getting Tyler Mahle back. And I mean, take it at face value. Chris Young is watching Jacob deGrom's throw 30 pitch bullpens 3 times a week, said it's the best he's ever seen him. There's a 2-time Cy Young Award winner, thinks he could have him back in late August. I think there's an upside to them. You poo-pooed this a month ago when I threw it out there. I just wonder about the Braves a little bit. I think they'll survive in this wild card thing, but I do wonder about kind of length of lineup and length of starting pitching in a way I didn't over the last 5 or 6 years because they were so deep and good. I don't know that it's impossible that the Mets could actually track down the Braves.
I'm not going to poo-poo that. The Braves have lost their best best pitcher, Strider. Right? They did have some all-star pitchers this year, but Strider was the best guy going into the season. They lost him. They lost Acuna, their best player. So I'm not going to poo-poo that now. Yeah, the Rangers. What if they run the table again? What if they win the World Series? I mean, I think Bruce Bochy is already the best manager over the last quarter century. Is he the best manager ever? I mean, if he's got, I'm losing count. How many World Series has he won at this point?
4.
He's won
4,
4.
3 with the Giants.
I mean,
and one
you win
last year,
5 World Series with underdog
and went with
teams.
San Diego, right? Went with San Diego.
Right. He got to the World Series. They obviously had no shot there, and it's the '98 Yankees. But hey, we thought they had no shot with the Giants. They certainly were not a favorite last year. They didn't lose a game on the road. I don't know. Is he lucky? I don't know. There's nobody else like this. He's amazing, and you're right. I mean, if they get DeGrom, Maile, Young, Carter all back, I mean, it should be a playoff team. But hey, look, Boston's better. Kansas City is much better than they were. American League is a little bit tougher at the.
I think it's about winning the division. I think Seattle's soft, but we'll see if they improve their offense over the next 2 weeks. John, let's give a little love to our 2 beat writers at the Post, Mike Puma and Greg Joyce. You never had to do this. I had to do it 7 times, which is to give the grades. And that was at a time where newspapers were dominant. There was nothing quite like the newspaper sitting in the middle of the room and every player looking at his grade that I had made. You might remember my good fight with Terry Mulholland one year about it. It was across a clubhouse.
Did he get an F?
Yeah, he got an F. And I want to say this because it is so much easier to just give better grades and like whatever. But you're always trying to be honest. Our friend Mike Puma, he's a tough grader.
Man, I'm glad I did not have him. He's great. He and Joyce were both great. I really enjoyed it today at the New York Post. Got to see the report cards, half-year report cards, and they gave out, I think, generally fair grades. That's not just because it's the Post that I'm saying this. The 2 guys, I don't know how closely you study this. The 2 guys I would have given a little bit higher to. They're both tough. Are Ben Rice. To me, I grade on a curve, right? I mean, I guess he feels funny giving him an A because he gave Judge and Soto an A. Is Ben Rice them? No. But, I mean, what were the expectations for him? And then Reed Garrett, B-. I barely heard of the guy going into the year. I mean, he saved them at the first at least month and a half of the season. I know his ERA now is mediocre, but I give him higher than a B-. But, I mean, there's, 60 guys that they graded. I think they did fantastic. I think it's awesome. If anybody has any complaints, come to me too, because I love the grades.
Yeah, I love the grades, and I give them both credit for being tough. If you look, like you went to the Yankees first, and Luis Gil got an A-. I mean, what was your expectation of Luis Gil going into the season?
Well, A- is a good grade, though. I think that's
right. But like you mentioned on a grade, like I got to say that when I did it, I did what was the expectation of the player? Yeah. I mean, Luis Gil is an A+. Luke Weaver was an A-. Luke Weaver was an A+. Michael Tonkin is a B+. Michael Thompson, I get it. I get it's crazy. You're like Judge is an A and Soto's an A. I'm going to give an A to Michael Tonkin. But like they picked the guy up on the scrap heap for a bad bullpen. He's helped save them a lot when he's done it.
We had a curve
so I
in
give
college.
them credit. I'm always thought of as the top, like being whatever. Yeah. And man, Puma's tough. Iglesias and Budo got A-.
Puma's got big stones. I got to give him credit. But I will say McNeil and LeMahieu, they earned
both got
F's.
See
what they are. Well, okay, we don't have to wait. Yeah, but they earned those grades. And yes, Puma, very tough. I said I'm glad I didn't have him, but I think he's tough but fair. I really do.
No, more than fair. But I mean, Viento's B+. I mean,
I don't know. I'd give him an A. I mean, he's got an 896 OPS. He didn't have a curve. He didn't put a curve out there. He said, look, if I'm giving Nimmo an A-, I guess he's a little bit better than Vientos so far. But I'm going to give a curve to him and Garrett as well.
Let's wrap it up by talking about the grades they gave to manager and GM. Again, what a joy for the 7 years I had to do that. Just think about like dealing with Buck Showalter after giving him a grade, which I only had to do 4 times. Stearns and Mendoza both got B+. You think he nailed that?
I'd give Stearns an A at this point. I mean, look, the guys that he acquired, I know Diekman got an F. I didn't notice Diekman was that bad, but okay, Diekman was, I guess, didn't work out, whatever you
And it's
want to
not on
say.
there. Wendell's probably an F if he would have stuck around. But I'm with you. I think the majority of these
I
small
mean,
signings have worked out
Severino,
great.
1 year, 13 million for Severino, Manaya. I mean, those guys are
Bader,
terrific.
Bader's 1 year
Bader's been
contract is
excellent.
working.
So I'd give Stearns an
And by
A.
the
I
way,
think
finding Torrens and Iglesias, even on the
Torrens,
margins, have
100
really,
grand. 100
yeah,
grand for Torrens. I think the Yankees would like to have him back. They'll give him 200 grand at this point. He's been great. I mean, he throws guys out, which nobody does nowadays, and certainly nobody with the Mets was doing that. Not even Alvarez. Mendoza's been very good. I mean, look, they were an 11 game trough to begin, and now they're over 500 in playoff position. He's got the right attitude. I think he is the right man for the job. I was skeptical when they hired him, as you know, as the bench coach of an underachieving Yankee team, and I think he's done very well. I think a B plus is fair there.
yeah. I think I'm with you. I think Stearns is costs a couple of things, but who gets them all right? But like maybe an A minus. I mean, I think Mendoza B plus is about right. Boone got a B from our friend Greg Joyce. Cashman got a C. What do you think?
C plus.
Oh,
Yeah,
was
I think
Cashman a
Boone.
C plus? I'm sorry.
I think so.
Yeah.
Boone, I think, yes, I think a B is fair. I think the bad stuff lasts too long with the Yankees. Obviously, they were good longer than they were bad, which is why they're only a game out of first place right now. I think a B is probably fair for Boone. As somebody who's been criticized as a Cashman apologist very recently, and at least in my letters that I do read. I think a C plus is probably fair. Obviously, Soto's been terrific, so that's a big plus. But there are a lot of issues remaining with the Yankees. This is exactly what Greg Joyce wrote, so I'm deferring to him. C plus is right. His comments are right. They need help in the infield. They need help at the bullpen, and he's got some work to do.
Yeah, I think these are. I think Boone B, holding the team together while Cole was out, I think has great value.
Yeah.
And the team played very, very well for the majority of the first half. But I'm with you. I'm not sure why once they get hit, they kind of can't bounce back up. These things
Too long, right?
sustain. Yep, it feels
Almost a
like too
month they
long.
were
Yeah,
terrible,
yeah,
right?
and
And it's not the injuries, right? Because Rice has been better than Rizzo, much
yeah,
better, right? So
yeah,
that balances the fact. Obviously, they've lost Stanton as they predicted correctly,
right.
and he was very good, and that's a loss. But I mean, is that really an excuse? They're not that they're making excuses, but they don't have one to make.
Yeah.
So the injuries are not it. That a month is too long to lose 8 series in a row. Too long.
Yeah, and I think that the C plus for Cashman, it's probably in the range. You get
Yeah.
Soto, and right now it doesn't seem like it was a dramatic loss. We have to see long term who Drew Thorpe is. If Michael King continue, I've been impressed. Michael King made, the worries about physicality. He made, I think, 19 starts in the first half was
Yeah.
pretty good. But let's not forget smaller trades at some point for people like Luis Hill. They always find guys in the margins like Michael Tonkin to help their bullpen.
Weaver.
Yeah, Weaver is a
Yeah,
good
yeah,
thing,
maybe he
but
deserved higher, a little bit
just
higher.
I
B
always go
minus.
back to this word,
You
John,
talked
is
me into
maybe
it.
a word way to like wrap up the segment. I think there's been some feel lost about everything with them, including putting together a roster. I just don't know how you've gotten to this point again where it went from Aaron Judge and everybody else to Aaron Judge and Soto and everybody else. I understand they're great. They're probably, as you mentioned, like the two best hitters, but the fall off after that, like when they go bad, is like, hey, can nobody here play?
Right.
And it just, I don't know what happens here with the entirety of the group. And look, the fairer grade, of course, always comes after the season. And I do think it's a important 2 weeks for David Stearns. I think it's a vital 2 weeks for Brian Cashman to find stuff to help fix this club.
Yeah, absolutely. The bullpen needs a little work, and certainly that offense, as you mentioned, it's really a two-man offense. Plus, we assume Rice is going to keep going. I don't know why we assume that, but assuming he keeps going, it's a 2.5 to 3-man offense. There are 9 guys batting in this team, right? And the rest of the guys are all below a 100 OPS plus, so they're all below average, other than Rice, Soto, and Judge. So I think I got work to do on the lineup, not just the bullpen. And we'll see. I'm sure they're looking at starters too. So he's got a lot to do. Stearns, did great in the offseason. He's got a little help because their Mets are willing to spend. As we saw, Phil Maton is going to cost them more than $6 million for 2.5 months of Phil Maton. So that should help them get some bullpen pieces that they vitally need.
Well, on the subject of money, the priceless Bob Costas, the best sports broadcaster there's ever been, will join us next on the show with Joel Sherman and Jon Heyman. John and I are so thrilled again to be joined on the show by Bob Costas. He's been with us before. Bob, I could go on about who Bob Costas is, but if they're listening to this podcast, they know. So thank you so much for joining us. And I'm wondering if I could start in a place where I try to get some scope to your career a little bit. You're still broadcasting baseball. It's probably close to 50 years you've been doing that for Major League Baseball. Do you like broadcasting a baseball game as much today as you did in the 1970s?
Well, I actually started in the early 1980s, so it's a little bit more than 40 years since I did. I guess my first game for NBC was in 1980, so that's 44 years. I like being around the game. I'm not doing as many games as I used to do. And with the passage of time, you can still be good. I don't know if I'm as good as I was in the 80s and 90s or when the Baseball Network started. You have to be honest with yourself about that. But do I still enjoy being around the game? And can I still have my moments, either a given game or large segments of a game where it's pretty much as good as it was before? Sure. But I think my role now is largely historical. I think I'm helpful to the Baseball Network and sometimes to other outlets on the 50th anniversary of Hank Aaron passing Babe Ruth or Willie Mays passing away. I see that the Baseball Network just this week got permission from HBO to replay an interview I did with Aaron and Mays in 2008 on HBO, and it's the only time they ever sat together for an extended interview, snippets at all-star games and whatnot. But we had them for more than an hour in a theater in 2008. And I think that's probably that and narrating things, that sort of thing. Baseball conversations like this, that's probably my best role at this point.
Well, I mean, we think you're great at everything. I think you're, I'm not going to speak for Joel, but I can't imagine who he would think is the best sports broadcaster ever. I don't even know who the competition is. Al Michaels is pretty good.
Well, I was going to pick you, John, and Bob was going to be 2, but if you insist, I'll put Bob 1. Okay.
I'm a writer, Joel. You know that. I'm only on here because I'm a writer. But Bob's number 1. Al Michaels is terrific. Vince Scully, just for his baseball alone, but he did other stuff. Yeah. Amazing. But Bob is the best, I think. But I'm going to change the subject. We just got past the All-Star game. All-Star game. I had my suggestions. The ratings were up. Obviously, they had a little problem with the anthem at the home run derby. I'm tone deaf, but they told me they had a problem with that. And the uniforms, I think, were an obvious issue. But what are the more serious issues of the All-Star game? What do you think? How can it be better? And what do you think about this year's?
Well, before we get to the more serious issues, one thing about your paper, for both of you, the New York Post, all right, whether you agree editorially, incredible sports section, and throughout the paper, the best headline writers ever. Okay? So, whoever does this, they're pretty darn clever on their own terms. And the headline above the botched anthem before the home run derby was "Star-Mangled Banner." Which
nicely done.
It kind of was. And then the poor girl had to check herself into rehab the next day. So we don't want to make light of it. The uniforms, we talk about the All-Star game, the uniforms have to go. It was always a great thing until very recently to see all the different uniforms. You wear your own team's uniform. And this year, about half the players in the game were first-time All-Stars. And so if a casual fan is tuning in for the All-Star game and he says, who is Seth Lugo? At least he would know Seth Lugo's with the Kansas City Royals if he's wearing a Royals uniform instead of what looked like pajamas with a generic, American League thing. And I also think, yes, the ratings were up. I thought it was a very good All-Star game. Obviously, you and I and Joel watched every second of it. Of course, it was a good game. Ohtani homered. Jarren Duran, who always had potential, now really coming into his own, gets the game-winning hit. We get to see Paul Skeens. It was only one pitch to judge, but at least we saw that. And you wonder how anyone ever hits Emmanuel Clase. And he finished the game. So a lot of things that should be highlighted were highlighted. But while the ratings were up, they were only up from the all-time low of last year. I think something that might spice it up, but you have to be careful about what some people would infer from it, would be American-born players versus international players. That might make it a little bit more interesting, because the distinction between the American and national leagues has been blurred because of interleague play, because of player movement, especially among star players. We're dating ourselves here to say this, but Roberto Clemente was a lifelong Pirate, and Hank Aaron was a lifelong Brave. And yeah, Willie Mays for 2 years at the end played with the Mets, but essentially he's a Giant. So that's the three outfielders for an entire generation in the All-Star game for the National League. And Al Kaline was a Tiger, and Mickey Mantle was a Yankee, and Carl Yastrzemski was a Red Sox. There's your outfield. So that those distinctions have been blurred. So maybe it wouldn't be so bad to break it up and not make it American versus National League.
Bob, you hit on two of the things I wanted to ask about the All-Star game. You mentioned the first-time players, and I understand why MLB brags about 39 first-time players. But my first All-Star game I remember was 1971. There were 25 Hall of Famers in it, and I hate to be the old man on the lawn. Just for reference, what you said, the starting National League outfield was Stargell, Aaron, and Mays. The backup outfield on the bench was Clemente, Brock, and Rose.
Right.
Not to mention Willie Davis was on that team also. So and I just wonder, are we doing enough to create stars? I understand the local aspect of this, and I want to go to this and wonder if I made Bob Costas commissioner. I would have gone to Judge and Ohtani and said, what do I have to do to have you guys in the home run contest? What do I have to do to have Bryce Harper in the home run contest? Like, tell me the rules. I'll do whatever rules you want, because I think a strong home run derby, which people do care about, kind of feeds into the star-making mechanism and then into the All-Star game. And then you stick around for a little longer than an at-bat or two. You're talking about Mays and Aaron play. They played whole games.
Played the whole game.
The world has changed. To me, do you guys want to be stars? Do you want the game to have more money flowing in it so you could do it? You got to compete in the home run derby.
Well, there's some feeling on the part of some players, and it's all anecdotal. I don't think we have any real analytic evidence on this. But
this is why I said you guys make the rules. You want to hit one round, take 10 swings. You want to do it like Mantle and Mays did it in black and white back when, that we still have film. I don't care. I just need you in the home run derby.
Yeah, the original home run derby is sort of a retro classic. What's the guy's name? Mark, I'm forgetting his last name, was the host. And he basically had only 5 or 6 phrases. So there'd be like a line drive to left, which falls for an out, and he would say, base hit in the ball game, but just a harmless out here on Home Run Derby.
That's good.
In uniform, Mickey Mantle, after his swings, would come and sit down with Mark Scott, I think, down with him. And while Willie Mays was taking his cuts, and Mark would try to feed Mickey some kind of line, and Mickey would just say some, cornpone thing and smile. And they did it at the old Wrigley Field, not Wrigley Field in Chicago, but Wrigley Field in Los Angeles, which was a Cubs farm team, I think, at that time in the old Pacific Coast League. So was also named Wrigley Field. But I believe we're getting too far into the past, and that's my fault. My point that I was going to make was that there are some players who think, especially as lengthy and exhaustive as the Derby is now under the present rules, hey, I messed up my swing for the second half of the season, at least the first week or two of the second half of the season. I messed up my swing, swinging for the fences in the home run derby. So you're going to have to change the format, as you suggested, to make it appealing enough for Judge and Ohtani. But I take your point. That's what the public wants to see.
I mean, if you want the ratings to go up, you got to make stars. And this is one of the star-making mechanisms, and we're not capitalizing on it.
One of the problems is just the whole change in the media landscape. I was in Chicago about a month ago for the unveiling of Ryne Sandberg's statue at Wrigley Field, and he asked me to come and introduce him because shows you how long I've been around. I called the Sandberg game in 1984 with Tony Kubek on NBC, where he hit the two last-ditch homers off Bruce Sutter, and Willie McGee hit for the cycle and wasn't even the player of the game. Just an amazing regular season game in a beautiful setting at Wrigley Field. That game got a higher rating on a Saturday afternoon in June than many World Series games get now. So if you're talking about the All-Star game, that fact, the game of the week, and the fact that the greatest players tended to stay with the same team and they were identified with their team and their league, you can't recreate that. We can fiddle at the edges, but you can't recreate a world in which the World Series routinely, even if it wasn't big market teams, the Cardinals played the Brewers in the 1982 World Series, and those games were getting ratings in the 30s. And I'm not talking about game 7. I'm talking about games 1, 2, 3. And all of that feeds indirectly into the popularity of the All-Star game.
MLB.com did do the analytics on that, and they did find that it does not mess up your swing. I don't think they were in the tank for MLB. They did actually mathematically looked at it, and guys who did do the Derby actually did a little bit better in the second half, and the guys who didn't actually did a little bit worse. So, I'm not sure what the reason is. I'm with Joel on this one. I got to see Judge and Ohtani in there. Bobby Witt's terrific. Teoscar's terrific, but got to see Judge and Ohtani along the same lines. In the game, the thing that really irked me, and I don't know what you think about this, and I get it, they want to get everybody in the game, and Ohtani had homered, and Torey Lovullo kept him in there for the third at bat, which is good. But then you have two men on base, they're down by 2 runs, and then they pinch hit for Ohtani with Ozuna. To me, I think people were there, the casual fan was there to see Skeens, Judge, and Ohtani. Ohtani's got a chance to win that game. I can't pitch it for him there.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. There's a commitment, and this isn't all that recent. Going back to the 90s, there was a commitment. Let's get everybody in the game. Maybe we hold one pitcher back in case the game goes extra innings. But let's get everybody in the game. But there might have been another place to get Ozuna in rather than that place.
Yeah, the participation trophy reaching all the way up to the major leagues here, where we're going to get everybody into the game instead of highlighting the game. I'm wondering, I was trying to think about Paul Skeens and the All-Star game. I'm thinking about the guys who started All-Star games. When Fidrich did, in my lifetime, what a big deal that was. When Fernando did it, what a big deal. I mean, Matt Harvey at Citi Field, when he did it, Doc, when he did it, Pedro. I wonder, again, you mentioned at the top what a great historian of the game you are. Can you frame Paul Skeens a little bit and what you think about him?
Well, I guess the closest to direct comp is Steven Strasburg. When Strasburg came up, I guess it was in 2010. And there was really a longer buildup to Strasburg because he was a big star at San Diego State and coached by Tony Gwynn. And then through the minors, I remember his games being televised. In the early days of the Baseball Network, his games at Syracuse or wherever were being televised on a lazy midweek afternoon on MLBN. So we knew a little bit more about him than we did about Skeens when he made his debut that night against the Pirates. And there was a lot of theater there because the Nats picked the games. A then weak Pirate team and a then weak Cleveland team for his first couple of starts, and he blew everybody away, struck out 14 in that first appearance. But Skeens, I guess, statistically is even better. I mean, he's had a handful of outings. He could get to the Hall of Fame and never throw a complete game in his whole life, unless he's left in once or twice to complete a no-hitter or a perfect game. But we see that at this point, as they're trying to be careful with him, he's been pulled from at least 2, maybe 3 no-hitters. His K rate per batter, his overall stats are pretty damn impressive. And he seems to carry himself with a level of poise. Like, I've been looking toward this for years, and I'm not awed by it.
Yeah, I mean, the game has changed with Tom Seaver, 61 shutouts. We're talking about a complete game. Game has changed. I'm going to turn to the Hall of Fame, which you are an expert on, and there's some interesting names on the ballot. Some of them carryovers, some new ones. I mean, I think Ichiro, everyone agrees, is a Hall of Famer. I'm going to read a list of names. Have any particular thoughts? Sabathia is a new one. Some of the holdovers, Wagner, Beltran, Andrew Jones, Utley, And then also new ones, King Felix and Pedroia. Maybe they look like long shots, but there's something to be said for guys who were great peak guys, as they say, were
Yeah.
great for a spell. What are your thoughts on some of those guys? And anybody stand out as somebody who should definitely get in?
Well, Ichiro will be a near unanimous first ballot person. I think we all agree on that, and no need to elaborate. But let's stipulate this. I think some people have gotten to the point where if you say, "I don't think this guy is quite a Hall of Famer," you're saying he wasn't a really, really good player. If you're even in the discussion, you had an admirable career, worthy of respect and appreciation. But there used to be a distinction between that and someone who was a Hall of Famer. But considering, and another aspect of this is we've also gotten to the point, and I don't think you two guys do it in your voting, but we've also gotten to the point where a lot of guys say, well, if guy A is in, then this guy should be in. And pretty soon, this guy is going to establish the lowest bar, and then we'll see who clears it after that. And pretty soon it will become the Hall of the very good and not the Hall of the greatest of the great. I think Joel has made this specific point that it has been the top 1%. It becomes the top 2%, which is still pretty damn exclusive. But if it becomes the top 2%, I think it fundamentally changes the nature of it. Having said that, Carlos Beltran has numbers as good or better than a number of Hall of Famers. And Billy Wagner's rate stats, the 11 or 12 innings of pitching in the postseason, don't help him at all. There, it's completely different than his regular season numbers. But those rate stats are hard to ignore. He wasn't a big accumulator like some people have been. He left relatively early. But those numbers are hard to ignore. So I think Wagner for sure, Beltran for sure. Andrew Jones, 10 gold gloves. Hard to overlook that. But again, Andrew Jones would have been a guy who 10 years ago I would have said, that's a head scratcher. Let's think about that. It doesn't seem automatic to me, but maybe now it is or should be.
Bob, I don't know if you're monitoring it, but I certainly do. We both do the Hall of Fame show every year. You're on the big desk. This year I was up at Cooperstown for the first time doing it. I'm usually in the studio, and I know what you're talking about because the last two shows, I think I'm the only one who mentioned who I didn't vote for on it, and that creates quite a blowback when you do that. I recently in the New York Post at our first half of awards, I mentioned how you could go either way, Gunnar Henderson or Aaron Judge, and I thought it was so close. And I picked Henderson, and I said it's a hair split. And I had a fan literally come up to me and start screaming at me about it. And I said, I said Aaron Judge was the second best player in the American League, not that he was clubbing baby seals on a beach, just for just for giggles. But if I was going to stick with the Hall of Fame, like CC Sabathia is on it, and I'm thinking about him kind of like opening the door to the last group of what I would call kind of close to pitching Lions, the Verlanders, the Scherzers, Clayton, Kershaw, and Cole, maybe the last of it. I think we're about to face a Hall of Fame vote soon. Maybe John and I won't even be voters by then, where it's like, we're going to look at guys. Hey, remember when 200 wins was the new 300? I think we're going to be at the 150 or 100. And what is it? Is Corbin Burns having a Hall of Fame career right now? He's kind of been consistently great. Is Max Fried I'm not sure we're going to know what a Hall of Fame pitcher looks like because it isn't going to look like anything historic. That last group is kind of petering out and starting on the voting with Sabathia.
Yeah, and CC had an admirable career. He took the ball in big games. He pitched deep into games when the equivalent of a complete game in the past was 7 or 8 innings. He actually threw some complete games and almost always at his best gave you the 7 or 8. He's an admirable player. I think that Verlander, Scherzer, Kershaw, the first 3 you mentioned, despite Clayton Kershaw's postseason troubles, they're all clearly ahead of CC when we think about this. But to your point, we're going to have some people. Now, Dizzy Dean and Sandy Koufax got in without winning more than 200 games. But Sandy Koufax quit early, threw 4 no-hitters, the last of which was a perfect game, won the pitching triple crown strikeouts, ERAs, and wins like at least twice, maybe three times during that run. That peak is so high. And Dizzy Dean got hit by a line drive and it screwed him up and his career was shortened. But until Denny McLain in 1968, he was the last guy that won 30. So you're talking about guys with extraordinarily high peaks, generally speaking, to even be in the discussion, like you say, among starting pitchers. You had to win 200 games and you had to have some other elements. A Cy Young Award, led the league in victories, extraordinary World Series performances before there was any postseason other than the World Series. Now, as you say, there will be people who make the Hall of Fame who never threw a shutout, even though they pitched 7 or 8 scoreless innings, never threw a shutout, never perhaps won a Cy Young, but had decent rate stats. And maybe you and John would scratch your head or even grimace at having to vote for those guys. But the writers now who are pecking away at Syracuse and Boston College and Indiana University, they don't care about that as much as you guys did. And when they come along and we're all in rocking chairs, there will be some guys in the Hall of Fame where we say, what the hell? But our time will have been past at that point.
One more on the Hall of Fame. I'm going to put you on the spot here to ask you about guys that we missed. Obviously, there were really good players knocked off that ballot with that 5% rule, but there were other guys that just didn't quite make it. I have regret about not voting for Keith Hernandez. I think he should be in the Hall. To me, he's an obvious case, but there are probably some others. I know some of the people say those center fielders, Edmonds, Lofton, we blew it with them. Some people say Roger Maris because, it is the Hall of Fame and he did have the greatest record for a long time. I know I'm putting you on the spot here. I didn't warn you about this in the past before this, but who would you say we've missed that should be in the Hall of Fame?
I've said for a while, and I hope that eventually we do it, that we should do a show at the Baseball Network that is about guys that we saw. We're not talking about relitigating some guys from the 1920s. Guys we saw who are as good or clearly better by our criteria than those already in the Hall of Fame, including many of their contemporaries. If Ozzie Smith is in the Hall of Fame by acclamation, and he should be, no question about it, first ballot guy, defined his position. Same thing with Brooks Robinson, who really didn't have the power numbers that we associate with some corner infielders, but he defined the position with the 16 Gold Gloves. Well, even though first base traditionally is not thought of as important defensively as shortstop or third base, but Keith Hernandez changed that, at least for the Cardinals and the Mets. He was a defensive force. He is by acclamation the greatest defensive first baseman ever, and by the standards of his time, to hit 15 to 20 home runs, drive in 90 to 100, bat over 300, and play the kind of first base he played, and to have key hits in the 7th games of 2 World Series. He was an impactful player in a way that some guys who were just compilers were not. So Keith Hernandez would be on my list for that. Was a guy ever, and this doesn't apply to Keith necessarily, was a guy ever considered, not for 1 year, but for a stretch, 3, 5, 6 years, considered the best player in the game or in the conversation among the handful of best players in the game? On that basis, Don Mattingly should be in. Yeah. Dave Parker should be in. Dale Murphy should at least be seriously considered. Kenny Lofton, one of the most impactful players. Now, he played for a whole lot of teams, so maybe that works against him, worked against Fred McGriff for a little while till he got to the Veterans Committee. But Kenny Lofton was a dynamic center fielder. He was an exceptionally good hitter, had some power, but a base stealer, a guy who could change games. I think of Kenny Lofton as being more impactful than some guys who are in the Hall of Fame, just perhaps based on numbers they compiled over long careers. And I do think that the fame part matters. Now, that doesn't mean that that Johnny Vandermeer should be in the Hall of Fame because it's famous that he pitched back-to-back no-hitters. But you can certainly make a case for Roger Maris. And it wasn't just the 61 home runs. He won the MVP back-to-back in 60 and 61. He played on 7 pennant winners, 5 with the Yankees and 2 with the Cardinals in the 1960s. He was a very good, not Clemente, but a very good right fielder with a strong arm. And he held a record that stood for a very long time. And with the exception of Aaron Judge, it's only been eclipsed by three guys directly connected to steroids. So you can make a case that Roger Maris holds a place in baseball history greater than a very substantial number of Hall of Famers. The Hall of Fame itself, however, they would respond to that by saying, look, the plaque room is not all that the Hall of Fame is. The Hall of Fame is, in fact, a museum that notes the important historical milestones throughout the game's history and has exhibits devoted to this era and that era and highlights players, including Pete Rose, who are significant historically, but don't have a plaque. And I think a lot of casual fans think that the Hall of Fame is only the plaque room, and it's not.
I think the lack of national kind of exposure hurts fame in our sports, right?
Oh, sure.
Brooks Robinson's in the Hall of Fame because to some degree, everyone was watching the 1971 World Series. That's how we did it.
Yeah.
On something else that has lost some luster over time, the Olympics, which is another thing you are tied to. We're about to, Summer Olympics are, I think, about less than a week away from beginning again. I'm wondering if I could ask a joint question here. General feeling about the Olympics, and do you think, Rob Manfred was asked about 28 in Los Angeles, whether baseball will make it back into the Olympics. What do you think?
Well, on the first part, I think that while the media landscape has changed dramatically, and that affects almost everything except, it seems, the NFL and the top college football matchups, you have to give the Olympics the benefit of the doubt because the last couple are played under COVID conditions, not as many fans in the stands, people distracted, and a lot of people in the United States were annoyed, to put it mildly, with the IOC for going back to Beijing, given China's human rights record, the fact that they had been there in 2008 and they were in Vladimir Putin's Russia in 2014. I tried to highlight those things. I didn't try to be overbearing about it, but I tried to acknowledge that these were issues, the IOC's affinity for authoritarian regimes when I was hosting the Olympics. But that may have left a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths. But now, okay, COVID isn't completely behind us, but it's not the specter that it once was, not anything close to it. And they go to Paris, which has, the potential to be an enchanted surrounding for an Olympics. After that, there's a Winter Olympics in Italy. And then, as you mentioned, to Los Angeles. This is the run of Olympics where both the IOC and NBC, as the American carrier, has a chance to get their groove back. I don't know that we can define that by matching ratings from a decade ago or more when the television landscape was different. But they should be able to experience a significant bounce back in this period of time. And if it doesn't, then we just have to accept that the Olympics has to fall into a different place in our imagination than it once did. In terms of 2028, I really hope that MLB players can participate in the Olympics. Previously, it was you couldn't be on the 40-man roster, but you could be a professional baseball player and go and play. But with the games in the United States, I think they can work out a way. People want to see Ohtani play for Japan. They want to see the great number of terrific Hispanic players play for their home nations. And they want to see Aaron Judge, and if he's healthy, Mike Trout and whomever, Gunnar Henderson, play for the American squad. And I think they could probably work it out so that they eliminate the All-Star game that year. They take a slightly longer break. And if there are preliminary rounds, the Major League stars join it only when they're getting down to the crunch of it. Quarterfinals, semifinals, finals. So you can take care of it in a handful of days.
One final question for me. I've already stated the obvious that you're the best sports broadcaster ever. I thought I should ask you, though, what you've kind of transitioned a little bit. You've done every sport, including Olympics, football, golf, everything, basically.
Mm-hmm.
You're mostly baseball at this point. What does your future look like?
I know where I'm going for dinner tonight. Beyond that, I don't know how many long-range plans you can make when you're 72 years old. I'm in an emeritus stage. And really, at the end at NBC in 2012, we decided, and I was the person who kind of presented this to them, I'm done carrying the ball primarily for NBC in 2016. Done with the Olympics as the primary host, done with football, certainly, which I had ambivalent feelings about. But I was already at the Baseball Network, starting from its inception in 2009. And I'd like to think that I'm grandfathered in. Like I mentioned before, I think I can be helpful in circumstances like this or historical milestones, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, that kind of thing. I can be helpful there. But I no longer see myself as the lead guy anymore. And there've been at least two generations of very, very able broadcasters who have come up behind me. So I don't want to hang on, but I do think that I can help in an emeritus role. I think that there are times when the viewer says, yeah, that's something we should see Bob on. And I'll do that as long as I still enjoy it. And as long as I can do it capably, 90% maybe as well as I ever did. If the fall off is too drastic, as we wish that some people who shall go nameless would recognize, if the fall off is too drastic, then you need to know that it's time to, walk into the sunset.
Well, there's been no fall off. You're a friend of the show. You're a big help to us. And despite the fact the pay is, I wouldn't even say minimal, it's nothing, as you know.
Yeah.
We really appreciate you being on. So I just wanted to say that before I turn it over to
Thanks.
Joel.
But even though you've overrated me, I will say this, just to kind of put it in focus. I did check over a long period of time, 40 years or whatever, I did check a lot of different boxes. So, if it was the decathlon, I might not have finished first in all the categories, but I would have either placed or showed in a side. So I checked a lot of boxes. So there was a period of time where the cumulative score was pretty good.
Bob, as a way to wrap, and this will be to John's chagrin, which will make me smile. I talk about basketball a lot here. I think I messed up your time framing at the beginning, but I do think this is a half century ago. You did the Spirits of St. Louis for the first time in 1974. Do I have that right?
That's correct.
This is the 50th anniversary.
Yes.
Go where you want. And to close the show, I've seen you tell great stories about the league, about Bad News, Marvin Bad News Barnes.
Right.
Tell your whatever story you want to tell it, and we'll play you out.
The ABA was the definition of the ridiculous and the sublime, often simultaneously. I think people came to understand just how good the level of play was, at least among the top stars. And when they played exhibitions against the NBA, when the two leagues existed as separate entities, now, granted, they're exhibition games, but it was just about a 50-50 split in those exhibition games. And the first year after the two leagues merged, half the 10 starters in the final between the Trailblazers and Sixers had played in the ABA, had played in the ABA, and 10 of the 24 players in the All-Star game had ABA backgrounds. So there was some really good basketball being played. But with the exception of a few franchises, and they were the franchises that got in, Denver, San Antonio, the Pacers, kind of the flagship franchise. They won 3 of the 9 championships in the 9 years of the league's existence, and the Nets. With the exception of those teams, all the other teams had financial troubles, to the point where you might check into the hotel with the Spirits of St. Louis, or try to, and the desk clerk would say, we can't give you any keys until you settle the bill from the last time, because you're running on such a shoestring. And players would take their game checks and run to the bank and cash them. I don't want to deposit it. I want cash, because I don't know if they're going to make payroll the next time. Now, in the midst of all this, there's a zillion stories, and I know you've probably read this book already because you're interested in basketball, but one of the great sports books ever is Terry Pluto's Loose Balls, which is an oral history of the ABA, and it's just filled with insight, but also hilarity. And it includes this story, which most Americans, the next census will show 1 in every 4 Americans has heard me tell this story. So I apologize up front. But Marvin Barnes, who was a great player by ability, great star at Providence, taken number 2 in both the NBA and ABA draft that year after Bill Walton. So that tells you how good he was. But he was also self-destructive. But it was hard to dislike him because he was kind of a miniature Muhammad Ali, not with social causes, but with how humorous he could be in extolling his own greatness. Okay. So on one particular occasion, we played the Kentucky Colonels in Louisville, and they had a really strong team. Artis Gilmore, Dan Issel, Louis Dampier held the record for the most 3-pointers in ABA history. Hubie Brown was their coach, and teams didn't travel by charter then. So we play at Freedom Hall in Louisville, and Louisville's maybe a 5-hour drive from St. Louis, but Louisville's on Eastern time. St. Louis is on Central Time. And so the traveling secretary, who was also the trainer, it's kind of a shoestring budget, passes out the itinerary. And it says TWA flight 305, depart Louisville 8 a.m., arrive St. Louis 7:56. Marvin Barnes beckons me over. We're in the airport. And he goes, bro, do you see this? I said, yes. He goes, well, I don't know about you, but as for me, I am not getting on any time machine. So when I tell that story, people think, geez, Marvin must have been a dummy. No, he was actually smart, and he knew that was funny. He also knew there was a better chance that I would get it than Fly Williams. So he decided to tell me.
Well, Bob, you can't tell the story enough. We feel like we can't have you on the show enough because it's always a joy like this. We truly appreciate, by the way, also working with you at MLB Network because you bring such gravitas and status to it. So thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you both. Always a pleasure. See you soon.
John and I, of course, thank Bob Costas, the great Bob Costas, for joining us on the show. John, hit or error?
I'm going to give a hit. This year's All-Star game, I think, was a plus. I wrote a whole column for the New York Post that appeared on All-Star Tuesday with 8 suggestions to make it better because the ratings were going down. They did go up this year and certainly was helped by the Skeens appearance in inning 1. So give Torey Lovello and company credit for doing that. I think the Skeens matchup with Soto was priceless. He guaranteed that he would get the at-bat for Judge. He did do that, though it was only a 1-pitch at-bat. The Ohtani home run was very nice, although I would have liked to have seen Ohtani bat yet another time. Lovello did leave him in for 3 at-bats. So I think the All-Star game, generally a plus. Obviously, we've all talked about the Home Run Derby anthem and the unis ad infinitum. I won't do that. So overall, a plus or a hit, for the All-Star game.
Yeah, I'm going to give an error here to the Yankees and how they handle things, like weasels, I believe. Capital W. Look, this will be easy for anybody who's listening to this saying it's your business. My business is to inform fans, and when the Yankees do not do things well in this area, they're essentially saying to hell to the fans. I don't cover the draft, so I don't have a dog in the race as far as this, except for talking about disrespect. After the first round of the draft, actually during it for some of it, the Mets made their first round draft choice available, Carson Bang. Not only that, they made Nolan McLean, who was his teammate and also a two-way player, available. And they made some news because McLean announced he's going to be just a pitcher. And they made Kip Gross available after that. And they made Gross and Drew Tesson available after the next 2 days of the draft. It's a 3-day event. Today is 2 days after the draft. The Yankees are finally making Damon Oppenheimer available 2 days after the draft. They've yet to make their first round or any of their draft picks available. To me, I think it screams to disrespect to your fan base who do care about your team and your future. You can Leon Rose this thing, right? I get it. Like most fans are like, I just want the Knicks to be good. But I think what he does is disrespectful to the fans to not to explain why Mikal Bridges is on the team or why he drafted who he drafted and talk to unbridled media, not just house organs, where you answer real questions that we assume your fan base wants to know about. I think this is weasel behavior by what is often a weasel group doing this. I think it's disrespectful to your fan base. And I want to say, you can't give me, I did what the Mets did because you can't give me New York because the Mets are handling it in a different way. And I did not survey the other 29 teams, but I'm on a lot of the listservs. So I saw multiple nights of the draft, every team, it felt like doing something with either their picks or the people who were making it. And there feels like one outlier that feels like it's above everything. And that's one of the teams we cover regularly, the Yankees. I think this is not good behavior towards your fan base.
Yeah, I guess we should give a half a hit to the Mets then, because they do a good job with the public relations, Ethan Wilson, Nancy, and the rest of them. So give them credit. There's nothing to hide with the draft. It's all positive news. So it really can't get this at all. You're not going to really get a rip job, even from the non-house organs. So it makes no sense to me why they do that. And yeah, I mean they're tough. I'm giving the Mets credit. Nimmo always available when needed. Lindor available when needed. Pete available when needed. They're a lot easier team to cover. It's not easy to cover at all, and
It's gotten tougher, obviously,
yeah, and
right?
we give credit to Greg Joyce and Mike Puma for doing the hardest job on the paper and writing 10 stories a day, and they do it fantastically, but why make it more difficult for them?
Yeah, it's ultimately what we do is we serve as the middleman and the conduit to the fans. And when you're kind of this dismissive and this disrespectful, I think you're saying something about how you feel about your fans. The Mets did, and the Yankees in this situation. Again, we thank Bob Costas. We always thank Jake Brown and Tommy Hogan, our producers. Give us a view on the New York Post Sports YouTube page for the show. Also, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to the podcast, give us a 5-star rating. And please stick with us on the show with Joel Sherman and Jon Heyman.